Hello, I will be walking you through my Denver Art Museum exhibit information gem called DAM Exhibit Info for short. So I'm going to start by running my program here. As you can see, the user is greeted with a welcome message and they have the option to select current or upcoming exhibits. A little bit of background on the Denver Art Museum page. I wanted to scrape the current and the upcoming exhibits separately so that the user could have the option to see just current or upcoming exhibits. So I use Nokogiri and Open URI to open and scrape this web URL here. Because the upcoming exhibits and the current exhibits had the same selector essentially, except for this ID here, I decided to scrape the exhibit information, taking in the argument of the selector, and then I iterated through the CSS on this page based on the selector given, iterated through each exhibit within that to create name, date, summary, and the link of that exhibit, which would then lead you to a description of that specific exhibit. So if the selector includes the word current, as we can see here in this ID attribute ID selector, then we're going to set the type of the exhibit to current. Otherwise, the type of the exhibit will be considered upcoming. When my exhibit instance gets created from this information, it gets created with a name, which is determined here, the date of the exhibit, a short summary of the exhibit, the type of the exhibit, whether it's current or upcoming, and then a link of the exhibit that will be used in this method via string interpolation to lead to then scrape the description of the exhibit that the user would like to see. As you can see here in my exhibit class, I have outer readers for the name, date, summary, type, and link because the scraper is already writing that information. So all that my exhibit class needs to do is read that. My description is an outer accessor because I've chosen to write and read the information in this method here. So if the user wants to see a detailed description of the exhibit, then this is when the exhibit.description attribute will get created within the instance of that exhibit. I have my @all class variable to store all the instances of my exhibits with the name, the date, the summary, the type, the link, and eventually the description, should the user choose to look at that. I have my create method, which I called in my scraper class to create each instance of the exhibit based on this selector, so we can get all current and upcoming exhibits and their information that I want the user to have access to. And we're going to save the exhibit created unless the exhibit already exists. So we're going to use this method find by name that finds, that goes through my class variable array and finds any exhibit where the name is equal to the name of the exhibit when it gets created. If it is, then it will find the name. Otherwise, it's going to save it into the array when it gets created. I make my exhibits here, and this is when I read the scraper information per each selector for the current exhibits and the upcoming exhibits. And then I have another method, all another class method, all exhibits by type, based on the type that the user will eventually select. I make all of my exhibit instances first, and then if the type equals current, then they're going to select all exhibits, or iterate through all of the exhibits and select the exhibits that have a current, or the exhibit type is equal to current, and then also do the same thing for upcoming. So we have two separate lists. And the description of the exhibit is scraped here, and we will get to that part in a second. So within my CLI, I am asking in my call method, I am asking the user for input. And because we have two separate exhibit types that we are calling, I have setting a case statement for the input, excuse me. When the type, when the input is equal to 1, then the type will be current, and otherwise the type will be upcoming. So when the user selects 1 or 2, the current or upcoming exhibits method per the type that they select, either current or upcoming, will get called. So I'm going to select current exhibits through number 1. And we will see here that we're going to see the type of exhibits at the Denver Art Museum. I use string interpolation here to pull in the type the user selected, whether it's current or upcoming. So you can see here the current exhibits at the Denver Art Museum. And then we're going to get a display of all of the exhibits that are currently at the Denver Art Museum through this method, display exhibits per the type selected again. So here we're calling on our exhibit class method to find all exhibits per the type selected, which is current. We're going to iterate through each of those dot with index starting at the number 1 instead of 0, and puts out the index number, the exhibit name, the exhibit date, and the exhibit summary of each exhibit. And then also give the user menu options to choose from at the end of that. So they can either select a detailed description of the exhibit from this list, or they can see upcoming exhibits or exit the program from there. If the user would like to see a detailed description of the exhibit, I will press 1 so that we can see a detailed description of the exhibit here. So in our menu options, as you can see up here, the user can select any of these options here. If I stick a binding in here and run the program again, you can see why I had to do, oops, this. Okay, so I had to set this conditional based on the input, because if the user selects the current exhibits, so the type we can see here is current, the input that the user entered was C. When that is the case, input to I, when it gets converted to an integer, you'll see is 0. I was having a problem that when the user selected one of these options, they were getting the description for the upcoming exhibits only, not the current ones. And so I set this conditional to say that if the input is equal to C, then the type will be current. Otherwise, it'll be upcoming for if the user selects U. So back to the program. So we have chosen to see, I want to see Paris to Hollywood description. So we select number 1 to see Paris to Hollywood. without, I also had to set a valid input. So before I had this conditional statement in there, the user could not select a number. The number, if they tried to select a number for exhibit they wanted to see detailed information about, they were getting not valid selection and getting thrown this menu options message again. In order to have the user, allow the user to be able to select a number for the exhibit, I had to create this conditional and determine whether that input was valid input. So this method, valid input, takes in arguments of the user input. So in this case, either 1, 2, 3, or 4, and the data of that input. So in this case, the data comes from the exhibit instance, all the current exhibit instances, the array of the current exhibit instances. So if the input is between 1 and the length of that exhibits array, the instances of the current exhibits array, if that equals or evaluates to true, then the integer will get returned, otherwise nil will get returned. So if the input was valid, and since we are taking in a string of input up here, we have to convert it to an integer here in between the integer of 1 and the length of the exhibits, all exhibits by type, with the arguments of current, all the exhibit instance array of all of those, which is 4. Then we're going to output the exhibit details per the type that it is, which is current, and based off of the selection, which is 1, 2, 3, or 4. If they select anything outside of number 4 or any letter, then the user will see a not valid selection, be given the menu options again. And for the exhibit details, I took in 2 arguments, the type of input, which is current or upcoming, and or the type of exhibit, sorry, and the input that the user selected. So in this case, number 1, which is number 0 in the array of all the exhibits by type. So the selection is equal to the exhibit instances, the all exhibit instances by the exhibit type, and the number within the array that the input correlates to is -1, since arrays start counting at 0. So we've taken the user input, subtracted by 1 to find the place in the array that exhibit instance lives. And then we output that exhibit description per the user selection once that's been done, and then also give the user more menu options if they want to go back. So now I want to take a look at the upcoming exhibits. Same thing here. We see that here upcoming exhibits at the Denver Art Museum. I want to take a look at revisions, say here. So now I get the detailed description of revision. If I input a not valid selection, I get this information here. I can then select something else. If I select number 5, also not valid selection. And same here, if I select number 6, not a valid selection. So I can keep going back through and looping through or exit the program here. I hope I touched on everything and didn't leave anything out. Okay, I think that's it. Thanks.